When Keanu Reeves suddenly wraps Sandra Bullock in a warm hug on the red carpet, the cameras pause and the entire event falls into a stunned silence. In that brief moment, decades of friendship, rumors, and unspoken feelings crash back like a wave. What was meant to be a routine appearance becomes the night Hollywood realizes their story was never really over. If you slow that night down in your mind, frame by frame, it doesn't look like a Hollywood premiere at first. It looks like two tired friends walking into yet another storm of cameras, not knowing that a single hug is about to change everything for them. And for one girl pressed against a cold metal barricade, praying not to disappear again. Outside the theater, the red carpet burned under 100 spotlights, as if someone had rolled out a river of fire and told famous people to walk across it without getting burned. Fans leaned over the rails with posters and phones, chanting names that tangled together in the warm evening air. Reporters rehearsed questions about box office numbers and fashion choices, while camera operators checked angles, waiting for the moment the two names everyone wanted finally appeared: Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock. At the far end of the street, in a rented tuxedo that still scratched at his neck, a 17-year-old named Maya adjusted her grip on a cardboard sign. She had colored the letters 3 nights in a row until her fingers were stained blue and gold. "Thank you for staying kind." Her hands shook so badly she had to press the sign against the barricade to keep it from rattling. She wasn't here for the sequins or the movie. She was here because years earlier, in a small, dark bedroom where the walls felt like they were closing in, a random interview clip of Keanu and Sandra had played on her cracked phone. They had laughed about failing, about getting older, about not fitting into Hollywood's idea of perfect. And somehow their honesty had cracked open a tiny window where the air was still safe to breathe. That night, she hadn't done the thing she thought would end everything. She had watched them talk instead. Now they were somewhere out there, in the line of black cars crawling toward the carpet, and Maya could feel her heart pounding louder than the music. In the back of one of those slow, moving cars, Keanu sat with his hands folded, watching the city lights smear against the tinted glass. The driver chatted into his earpiece, but the sound barely reached him. His stylist had straightened his tie 3 times and told him to smile more, to lean into the nostalgia tonight. Studio executives loved that word, nostalgia. It meant easy money, soft questions, posters of younger versions of yourself looking braver than you felt. He brushed his thumb over the edge of the invitation still tucked in his pocket. A charity premiere, they had called it, for a new action film built around hope and second chances. Ticket sales would fund emergency shelters for families who had lost everything in disasters. It was the kind of cause he believed in. It was one of the reasons he had said yes. The other reason had a name he hadn't said out loud in months: Sandra. They had promised each other to keep some space, not because there was anything wrong between them, but because they were tired of hearing about themselves like they were a rumor and not real people. Every interview twisted their friendship into another headline. So they took different projects, different cities, different carpets. "We'll give the world a break," Sandra had joked. "Maybe then they'll let us just be us again." But the script for this new movie had landed in both their hands on the same week, like some strange coincidence the universe couldn't resist. The studio wanted them together on screen again, older now, a little broken, fighting for people who had nothing left. Reading those pages, he had felt something in his chest stir. Not romance, not nostalgia, something simpler and heavier, the feeling that the story mattered. He should have been excited tonight. Instead, he felt a dull ache of worry. He hadn't seen Sandra in person since they wrapped filming. A few messages, a couple of voice notes that ended with soft laughter and long silences, that was all. He wondered if she was nervous too. He wondered if she still hated red carpets as much as she always claimed. A few cars behind him, Sandra's limousine rolled to a stop at the edge of the screaming crowd. She drew in a slow breath, counting to 4 like her therapist had taught her. Inhale, hold, exhale. Her gown glittered under the interior lights, thousands of tiny crystals stitched by someone who probably hadn't slept in 3 days. She knew the dress would photograph perfectly. She also knew none of that sparkle could hide the fine lines around her eyes, the ones internet comments liked to circle with red circles and cruel words. Her phone buzzed beside her. A last-minute message from her agent. "Remember, smile, keep answers light, focus on the film and the charity." They will ask about you and Keanu. Don't feed the rumors, you're both bigger than that. She switched the phone off without replying. It wasn't that she didn't understand, she did. Studios invested millions, they wanted control. Publicists built careful stories, they wanted predictability. But lately, predictability felt like a cage. At this point in her life, after all the near misses and quiet heartbreaks and strange miracles, she wanted to talk about things that actually mattered. Fear, second chances, the way kindness from a stranger could tear you open in the best way. Her stylist adjusted a loose strand of hair and gave her a bright, empty smile. You look perfect. They're going to go crazy when you and Keanu stand together again, just like old times. Just like old times, she thought, except everyone is older and carrying more ghosts. The car door opened. A roar of sound crashed over her, louder than any movie soundtrack. She stepped out into the flash storm, blinded for half a second, and did what she had done for years. She smiled like she wasn't afraid. Reporters shouted her name, their questions tumbling over one another. Sandra, to your left. Who are you wearing? What made you say yes to this script? She moved slowly down the carpet, pausing for photos, giving quick, light answers. The movie was important, the shelters, the hope. She let those words fill her mouth, but a small part of her stayed detached, watching herself from a distance like a character in someone else's story. Halfway down the carpet, she spotted the image every outlet had been waiting to capture. A large digital screen looping clips from their earlier film together, the one that made them household names. She saw herself and Keanu younger, running, laughing, defying disaster with perfect timing and movie magic. The crowd cheered at the memory. Someone started chanting, "Reunite! Reunite!" The chant caught like a spark on dry leaves and spread along the barricades. Sandra's smile wavered. She turned away from the screen and almost collided with a young reporter who looked one question away from fainting. I'm sorry," the woman stammered, lowering her microphone. "First carpet, I'm a little nervous." Sandra saw the tremor in her hands and for a moment recognized herself. She placed a reassuring palm on the woman's arm. "Hey, you're doing great. Ask me the question you're afraid to ask. That one's usually the good one." The reporter blinked, surprised, then laughed. "Okay, are you scared tonight?" It was so honest that Sandra didn't even try to dodge it. "Yes, I am, but scared people can still show up, right?" She glanced up at the sky of cameras. "Sometimes that's the bravest thing we do." The woman's shoulders relaxed. The answer wouldn't trend, but something in the reporter's eyes changed, as if a knot had just come loose inside her. Sandra moved on, feeling a little steadier. Small acts of kindness were quiet, but they were real. They were the only part of this circus that felt like solid ground. Near the middle of the carpet, the noise suddenly spiked. Phones shot into the air like 1,000 tiny satellites pointing in one direction. Keanu's car had just arrived. From her place at the barricade, Maya stretched onto her toes, craning her neck. She saw him step out of the car in a simple black suit, his hair a little longer than on the poster, his expression softer than any of the intense character stills plastered around the theater. He raised a hand in a shy wave, and the crowd erupted. For a second, he looked almost embarrassed by the volume, like a quiet guy who had accidentally walked into his own surprise party. He started down the carpet, stopping every few steps. He bowed his head to listen closely when fans spoke, signed posters with slow, deliberate strokes, and accepted a hand, drawn portrait from a child as if it were an award. A photographer yelled for him to hurry. He nodded, then stayed exactly where he was until the child finished explaining every detail of the drawing. Maya watched him move, and something inside her unclenched. He looked tired, yes, but he also looked like the same person whose offhand comment in an old interview, "You never know what battles someone is fighting, so try to be kind," had dragged her back from the edge. Her lungs felt tight. She wanted to shout those words back at him to make him understand how much they'd mattered. A sudden metallic groan snapped through the air. A section of barricade a few meters down from Maya lurched forward as the pressure of the crowd shifted. People screamed, stumbling as the heavy rail tilted. Cameras swung around. Security guards moved, but for a second, everything seemed to happen too fast and too slow at once. The rail gave another sharp lurch. A small boy in the front row lost his grip and pitched forward, his feet leaving the ground. Keanu heard the scream before anyone else did. His head snapped toward the sound, body moving before his brain caught up. In 3 long strides he was at the barrier, grabbing the metal edge with both hands. The muscles in his arms jumped as he hauled it back upright, bracing his weight against the panicking surge. "Easy, easy," he said, voice calm but firm, the way he might talk a stunt team through a risky move. "Nobody push, everybody's okay, just breathe." The boy dangled for a terrifying heartbeat. A woman, his mother, by the way she shouted his name, lunged forward, clutching at his jacket. Her fingers slipped. The child's eyes went wide. Sandra saw only the blur of movement from farther down the carpet. The crowd buckling, cameras wheeling, security in dark suits rushing past her. Instinct overrode training. She hiked up the hem of her gown and ran toward the chaos, ignoring her publicist's frantic hiss of, "No, no, stay for the photos, let security handle it." By the time she reached the section, Keanu had one arm hooked around the boy's torso, still half over the rail, still fighting the weight of the crowd pressing in. Sweat slid down his temple. The boy clung to him, sobbing. Fans around them tried to back up, but there was nowhere to go. Everyone was packed too tight. Someone somewhere shouted that they heard a popping sound, maybe a camera flash, maybe worse, and the tension spiked again. Without thinking, Sandra stepped between the rail and the press line, spreading her arms wide. "Hey, back up a little, okay?" Her voice carried in that oddly commanding way only fear can give. "No one's getting a picture if we all fall over. Give him space." Maybe it was the sight of her in that glittering gown with her feet planted like a linebacker, or maybe it was just that they needed someone to listen to. The people nearest her shuffled back an inch, then another. Security slipped into the gap she'd opened, reinforcing the barrier with quick clamps. Keanu felt the pressure ease. Gently, he lifted the boy fully back over the rail and into his mother's arms. "You good, buddy?" he asked, brushing hair from the kid's eyes. The boy nodded, tears streaking his cheeks. You're really strong." Keanu smiled just a little. "You're the strong one, you held on." Phones filmed everything. Flashes went wild. Somewhere, a producer was probably calculating the PR value of this moment. On the ground, though, it smelled like metal and sweat and human fear. It felt like a close call that could have gone bad in a way no studio could spin. He glanced up and finally saw Sandra on the other side of the barrier, her breath coming fast, her gown slightly askew, eyes scanning the crowd for anyone else in danger. Their gazes locked over the rail, and for a moment there was no noise, no cameras, just the shared understanding of people who had learned to be calm inside other people's chaos. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey," she answered, voice matching his. Security began ushering them away, insisting they continue down the carpet, that the show had to go on. Keanu took one last look at the boy, offered Meyer a quick reassuring nod without quite realizing it, then stepped back onto the red. Maya clutched her sign, her heart hammering. When his eyes had swept over her, it was like standing in clear sunlight after months of fog. She hadn't said what she came to say, but maybe she would still get a chance. The incident had shaken more than the rail. As Keanu and Sandra walked side by side now, cameras tracking every step, a studio publicist rushed up between them, forcing a bright, brittle smile. "That was dramatic," he said through clenched teeth. "But we need to keep things smooth from here. No more unscripted heroics, okay? And absolutely no hugging, no fueling the gossip. We want the headlines to be about the movie and the charity, not your personal lives. Just stand together for a few shots, a little distance, very professional. Got it?" Sandra stared at him, still feeling the quiver of adrenaline in her muscles. "A kid almost got crushed," she said quietly. "That wasn't a stunt." I know, he replied, already glancing past them at the cameras. "And it'll play great. Just after this, let's not add any more surprises, all right?" The word hugging stuck in Keanu's mind like a splinter. It shouldn't have mattered. Hugs were harmless. Except when you were them, and the world liked to turn harmless things into headlines with teeth. They reached the center of the carpet where the biggest cluster of photographers waited, lenses trained, fingers ready on the shutter. A giant backdrop loomed behind them, plastered with the film's title and the charity's logo. This was the moment the whole premiere had been built around, the reunion shot. Keanu and Sandra, side by side again after years apart. They took their places, leaving a polite gap of air between their shoulders. The photographers barked orders. Closer. Look here. Big smile, Sandra. Keanu, arm around her, please. But the warning from the publicist pressed down on them like invisible hands. They shared a quick, almost apologetic glance and stayed where they were, smiles measured, bodies careful. On the barricade, Maya finally found her voice. It tore out of her raw and too loud, fueled by everything she'd held in for years. Please, she shouted, her sign trembling above her head. Can you just hug? One real hug. Some of us are still here because you were kind. The chant and chatter stuttered. A pocket of silence opened around her words. Cameras swiveled. Microphones dipped. Even the photographers paused, fingers hovering. Keanu heard the crack in the girl's voice. He turned his head, searching until he saw her, thin, pale, eyes too old for her age, clutching a cardboard sign that looked like it had survived a storm. Their gazes locked, and in that instant he saw not a fan, not a photo op, but a human being shaking like she might fall apart if no one reached out. Next to him, Sandra's hand trembled where it hung at her side. He noticed the tiny movement the way you notice a glass about to slip off a table. All the warnings, all the planned distance, all the years of protecting their privacy collided with the simple, stubborn truth rising in his chest. People needed something real more than they needed another careful image. He drew in a slow breath, feeling the entire red carpet hold that breath with him. Then, ignoring the publicist's alarmed hiss and the scattered gasps from the press line, Keanu took a small step toward Sandra and lifted his arm. His hand hovered in the space between them, inches from her shoulder, as the cameras leaned in and the night tightened around the unfinished gesture, waiting to see what he would dare to do next. His hand didn't hover for long. It settled on her shoulder with a quiet certainty, warm and familiar, like it had always belonged there. Sandra felt the tension in her spine loosen an inch, just enough for her to lean in. She stepped closer, closing the space the publicist and the headlines had built between them, and wrapped her arms around his middle. For a breath, the red carpet really did stop. Flashes still exploded, but the shouting died into a stunned hush. It was as if the whole night had been running on loud, fast music, and somebody suddenly pulled the plug, leaving only the sound of hearts beating and cameras clicking in disbelief. Keanu held her like a person, not like a co-star, not like a publicity shot. His cheek brushed her hair. He smelled faintly of cologne and something simple, coffee maybe. His chest rose and fell against her arms, steady and solid. "You okay?" he murmured, the words meant for her alone. "Getting there," she whispered back. "You." He let out the smallest breath of a laugh. "Been worse." Around them, the wall of lenses adjusted, zooming in, hunting for angles. Somewhere in the crowd, a journalist hissed into a live mic. "We are witnessing this in real time, folks." But his voice sounded far away. Maya's voice, the one that had asked for the hug, had vanished into a choke of tears. She pressed one shaking hand over her mouth as the other clung to her sign. She watched them hold onto each other, not as movie characters outrunning explosions, but as two human beings who knew what fear felt like and were choosing not to face it alone. It didn't look like a PR stunt. It looked like relief. Inside the hug, Sandra felt something uncoil that had been wound tight for years. All the time she had wanted to hug him at rap parties and premieres, and had stopped herself because of what the gossip blogs would say. All the time she had swallowed her fear and smiled for the cameras just because that was what you did. In this moment, she was simply a woman who had watched a child nearly get hurt and had almost come apart, holding onto a friend who understood exactly why her hands were still trembling. Keanu's mind flickered through memories like someone flipping through old film reels. The first time they'd met on a cheap set with cheap coffee, the time they'd sat on a curb at dawn after a night shoot, talking about how fast everything could be taken away, the countless times he'd stopped himself from reaching out because it might send the wrong message. Tonight, the only wrong message would be pretending he didn't care. They pulled back slowly, not in a rush to return to the performance. Her eyes were damp but bright. His were softer than any of his action hero posters allowed. The crowd found its voice again in a single rising cheer that rolled down the barricades like a wave. Keanu turned first, searching for the girl who had asked for what none of the professionals had dared demand. It took him a moment to pick her out of the blur of faces and screens. Then he saw the sign, "Thank you for staying kind." "There," he said under his breath, angling his chin. Sandra followed his gaze. When she spotted Maya, something shifted in her expression, recognition almost, though she'd never seen the girl before. Maybe because she knew that trembling look. Maybe because she'd worn it herself once in a far less glamorous place, talking herself out of giving up. "Can we get her?" Sandra asked quietly. The publicist nearest them nearly swallowed his own tongue. "No, no, no, we absolutely cannot." But Keanu was already signaling to a security guard, his voice low but firm. "Her, with the sign, please bring her over, gently." Security hesitated just long enough for the publicist to whisper, "This is not in the plan," before the guard waved at Maya. "You," he called, "with the sign, take it easy, don't climb, we've got you." The crowd parted in surprise as she was helped over the rail, her sneakers scraping against the metal. Her knees almost buckled when her feet touched the carpet. It felt nothing like she'd imagined from TV. It was softer, yes, but right now it might as well have been made of water the way her legs wanted to fold. Keanu stepped toward her with a small, reassuring smile, not the big movie star grin, but the one that crinkled the skin around his eyes and made him look like a neighbor greeting you in the hallway. "Hey," he said, like they were meeting in line at a coffee shop. "You okay up here?" She tried to answer, but the words tangled. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I shouldn't be here." Sandra joined them, her gown shimmering under the lights, yet the way she looked at Maya made the space feel strangely normal. "You absolutely should be here," she said gently. "You asked for something honest. We could use more of that." Maya's throat tightened. Up close they looked human, tiny imperfections in their skin, lines from laughter and worry, the tiredness under the makeup. It made everything both more surreal and more real. "I just wanted to say thank you," Maya managed, her voice shaking. "Years ago I saw this interview where you two were talking about failing and still trying. I was in a really bad place. I thought maybe I was done, but you said you never know what battle someone is fighting, so be kind." And her eyes flooded, the words dissolving. "I decided to wait one more night, then one more. I'm still here because of that. So when I heard you were both coming here, I needed you to know." The red carpet didn't usually hear sentences like that. It heard things about fashion houses and fan reactions and weekend projections. This was heavier, and it hung in the air between them, raw and unpolished. Keanu swallowed. There were no prepared lines for this kind of gratitude. "Thank you for telling us," he said, the phrase sounding inadequate and yet completely true. I'm really glad you're still here." Sandra's eyes glistened. She brushed a tear from her cheek, not caring who saw. "You waited one more night," she repeated softly. "That's the bravest thing anyone does, not the movies, not the stunts, that." Maya let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half disbelief. "I keep thinking if I disappear, no one would notice. But tonight everyone's looking, and I don't know how to handle it." "They're looking at the dress and the drama," Sandra said. "But the people who matter, they're seeing you. They'll remember the girl who asked for a real hug." Keanu glanced at the cameras, then back at her. "And for the record, we'd notice," he added quietly. "You matter, even when no one's watching." The words sank into her like anchors, heavy and somehow keeping her from drifting away. Photographers, sensing something they couldn't script, snapped faster. The studio publicist hovered at the edge of the frame, torn between panic and calculation, already imagining tomorrow's headlines. The studio would love the saved from the edge angle, he thought, if they controlled it. "We should, get a photo?" one of the event coordinators suggested, eyes sparkling with the kind of hunger that saw storyboards instead of people. "For the charity page, very inspiring." Maya stiffened. Being used for inspiration suddenly felt like another way to vanish, turned into someone else's headline instead of a person. Keanu read it in her face. "Only if you want to," he said. "No pressure, you can say no, you don't owe anyone anything tonight, not even us." She looked between them. Part of her wanted to disappear back into the anonymous darkness of the crowd, where no one expected courage from her. Another part, a newer one, wanted to stand here a little longer and let herself be seen. "Okay," she whispered finally. "One picture, but can I stand between you?" Sandra smiled, wide and honest. Best spot in the house. They flanked her, each placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. For a second, when the flash went off, Maya didn't imagine how bad she would look online or whether people would laugh at her. She just thought, I am still here, and that matters. The photographers shouted, their voices overlapping, trying to milk the moment. The spell threatened to break. Security guided Maya carefully back toward the barricade, making sure her feet found the gaps in the rail. As she stepped down, Keanu caught her eye again. "One more night," he mouthed. She nodded, clutching her sign, feeling like her ribs were too small for her heart. By the time she pushed her way back through the crowd and out to the side street, her phone was already buzzing like a trapped insect. Notifications stacked on top of each other, tags, messages, unknown numbers. A stranger's shaky livestream had caught the whole scene. Her tear-streaked face, her sign, their hug. The clip was exploding across platforms before she even reached the bus stop. On the ride home, stuffed between strangers and the smell of takeout, she watched herself through a dozen different captions. Fan saved by Keanu and Sandra's words. Red carpet hug goes viral. Is this the realest moment in Hollywood? Mixed in were other comments, sharp and cold. She's clearly acting. Another clout chaser using mental health for attention. Watch, she'll have a GoFundMe by tomorrow. The words pierced straight through the thin armor she'd built tonight, her lungs constricted. The bus hummed gently beneath her, but her thoughts were anything but gentle. She locked her screen and pressed it face down on her lap, staring at the reflection of her own outline in the dark window. I think I just broke my life again, she whispered to the glass, her voice almost too soft to hear over the engine, as the city lights slid past like stars she wasn't sure she deserved. Morning didn't wait for anyone's permission. It arrived with the glow of screens and the relentless churn of news anchors who needed something to say every second. Clips from the night before played on repeat. The wobbling barricade, Keanu catching the boy, Sandra holding the crowd back, the hug that seemed to freeze the flashing world, the trembling girl with the hand-painted sign. Commentators called it an unscripted masterclass in humanity or a genius viral moment, depending on which channel you landed on. In a small apartment with thin walls and a leaking bathroom tap, Maya watched versions of herself she didn't recognize. In one edit, soft piano music floated under her stammering words, her confession neatly trimmed into the most dramatic seconds. In another, big text flashed over her face. When your idols save your life again. Her notifications were beyond counting. Thousands of likes, hundreds of follow requests, dozens of DMs. Some were warm, heartfelt paragraphs from strangers who had lost siblings and friends, thanking her for speaking up. Some were desperate messages from people saying they were where she used to be and asking her how to hold on. A few were knives thinly disguised as jokes. Enjoy your 15 minutes. Bet they forgot you already. If you really wanted to die, you wouldn't be smiling in that photo. Her stomach clenched. She clicked her phone off and spun it between her palms like a coin she couldn't decide to spend or keep. Across the city, in a quiet kitchen where the curtains were still drawn, Keanu sat at a small table with a cup of untouched tea. His own phone lay upside down in front of him. He had seen enough in the first 5 minutes of waking up. The avalanche of tags, the emails from his team, the video of Maya being clipped for morning talk shows, her pain turned into sound bites and thumbnails. His manager's text sat at the top of the screen. You need to do a follow-up statement. The studio wants to frame this as part of the film's message. They also want the girl for a featurette. Could be powerful. Call me ASAP. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the heaviness that came after nights like last night. Not the physical tiredness. He was used to long shoots, but a moral fatigue, an ache that came from watching the world try to package something real into something consumable. He thought of Maya's hands shaking, the way her voice cracked when she said she was still here. She wasn't a symbol. She was a person just barely holding herself together in the middle of a noisy miracle. He pushed the phone aside and reached for a pen and a notepad. If he couldn't say the right thing to the millions of strangers dissecting the moment, maybe he could try to say something true to her. "Dear Maya," he wrote, then stopped. The words on the line blurred. A letter felt too small against the tidal wave she was facing, and if it ever leaked, it could make things worse. Instead, he picked up the landline, the one few people knew he still used. He dialed the number for the charity organization partnering with the film, the one that ran both shelters and mental health programs. "This is Keanu Reeves calling," he said when the receptionist answered, always a little embarrassed to introduce himself. "I'd like to speak to someone about getting urgent support to a young person who might need it, and I'd prefer we do it quietly." In another part of town, Sandra stood barefoot in her living room, still in sweatpants, hair twisted into a messy knot. Her TV showed the hug on a loop, muted, while the captions crawled underneath. "Sandra and Keanu. The hug scene around the world." Her teenage son had texted late the night before, a rare all-caps message. "Mom, you broke the internet." She'd smiled at that, but the smile had faded as the interviews rolled in this morning. Every host wanted to know if the hug meant something romantic, if the reunion hinted at secret feelings, if the girl's confession had been planned marketing. She grabbed the remote and turned the TV off. The silence was almost aggressive. Her phone buzzed with a call from her agent. She answered reluctantly. I know, the agent said without preamble. "You're not watching, but the coverage is wild. Good news, the film's pre-sales are through the roof. The charity link is getting donations like we've never seen. Bad news, the studio wants to align messaging before tonight's big televised charity event." "Translate," Sandra said, already wary. "They want you and Keanu to stay on script. Light, hopeful, inspirational, not too dark. No more talk about suicidal thoughts on camera. Their worried sponsors might bail." She laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "We didn't bring it up. She did, because it's her life." "I'm just the messenger," the agent sighed. "Look, they also want the girl at the event tonight. Front row, maybe even on stage for a quick segment. They think it'll keep the momentum." Sandra closed her eyes, picturing Maya's pale face under the harsh bus light, the way her shoulders hunched like the world was a weight. And does anyone think it might crush her? A pause. "You know how this works. We tell stories. Stories need faces." "Stories need truth more than faces," Sandra shot back. "She's not a prop." There was another pause, longer this time. "I get it. I do. But if you and Keanu are involved, maybe you can protect her, shape how it goes. Otherwise, they'll find a way to do it without you." That stuck. Sandra rubbed her temple. She hated that her agent was right. This machine didn't stop just because she wanted it to. Maybe the only way to keep it from chewing Maya up was to stand inside it with her. "Fine," she said. "But if she says no, that's the end of it. And if she says yes, we do it on her terms, not the studio's." "You realize that's not really how these things—" "That is how this thing is going to go," she interrupted. "Or I walk, they can have the dress back." Her agent exhaled. "All right, I'll try to make it happen. You're meeting Keanu and the producers at 3 to finalize the program. Wear something comfortable. It's going to be a long day." By late afternoon, Maya found herself sitting in a quiet counseling office the charity had arranged. Walls painted a soft, forgiving blue. A woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice sat across from her, a file open on the desk. "I'm glad you came," the counselor said. "You're not in trouble, we just want to make sure you're okay. You've been through a lot in 24 hours. Maya shrugged, twisting a rubber band around her fingers. "Feels like nothing and everything at the same time." The counselor nodded. "You've been asked to be at the event tonight." "You already know," Maya blinked. "The studio called us, yes. They're very excited about your journey." The counselor made air quotes with a small, wry smile. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified," Maya said quickly. Then more quietly, "But also, I don't know. Part of me keeps thinking if I can say it out loud once, maybe it'll stop owning me." "That's a brave thought," the counselor said. "Here's what matters. You don't owe them anything. You don't have to be inspirational. You don't have to answer questions you don't want to. You're allowed to say no." Maya thought of the messages from people who said her words already helped them feel less alone. She thought of the troll who told her it was all fake. Her chest tightened. What if saying no means someone else doesn't hear that it can get better? She whispered. What if saying yes before you're ready hurts you? The counselor replied gently. You are not responsible for saving the world. You're responsible for staying alive in it. They sat there in the quiet for a moment, the ticking of a wall clock filling the space between them. I think I want to go, Maya said finally, but I'm scared I'll mess it up. Then we make a plan, the counselor said. Step by step, you'll have boundaries, you'll have support, and if you get overwhelmed, you walk off that stage. No drama, no explanation needed. You and your safety come first. As she left the office with a small card of emergency numbers in her pocket, Maya's phone buzzed with an unknown caller ID. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. Hi, is this Maya? The voice on the other end was warm, slightly hesitant. This is Keanu. Her breath caught. Hi. I hope it's okay I'm calling, he said. The charity helped us connect. I just wanted to say whatever you choose about tonight, it's your choice. No pressure. If you come, we'll be there with you. If you don't, that's completely fine. The fact that he was offering her an out, not a request, loosened something tight in her throat. I'm coming, she said, surprising herself with how steady it sounded. I think I need to. All right, he replied. Then we'll make sure it's about the right thing, not the headlines, you and the people listening who might need to hear they're not alone. Okay, she whispered. See you